Welcome to Reaction. I'm Ian Martin, editor of Reaction. I'm joined by Maggie Pagano, executive editor of Reaction. Today we're talking about Afghanistan and posing the question, is Pax Americana, the American security guarantee to the Western world, rooted in the idea of American leadership of the West, is that doomed in the aftermath of what's happened in Afghanistan? Maggie, it's been a while since we talked because I've been away. You've been away. A lot has happened on the
Indeed.
ground in Afghanistan, and I'm sure we're going to make some more videos and have some more discussions about that. We'll be talking about it for months and years to come. But you, like me, were very struck by the documentary by Adam Wishart that aired on BBC One this week on 9/11. It's called
Mm.
Inside the President's War Room, which of course takes you back 20 years to, in a sense, where all this began. Firstly, why did that documentary really grab you so much?
I think it just reminded you of exactly the horror and the tragedy and in fact the magnitude of what happened. You know, we talk about 9/11 almost as an abstract, but just seeing those buildings coming down, seeing Bush and Air Force One flying around the States, not knowing where to land, and him wanting to go back to Washington. I mean, it's just it was like watching a movie, wasn't it? One of those horror movies.
Yeah.
And I think the most striking point though was when Bush was explaining why he wanted, I suppose, revenge, why he was at war. And having been through that and seen it so close, you can sort of understand the initial attack, if you like, on Afghanistan. The rest we can talk about, but you know that he wanted to go and get the perpetrators. I'm not
Mm.
saying right or wrong. I'm just saying you could understand the anger that he felt, which he expressed so well.
Yeah, it's a very powerful film that Adams made, and for those who haven't seen it, really recommend it, and we'll include the link to it on BBC iPlayer underneath this video. Also, if you're not a subscriber to Reaction and you enjoy these videos, just hit the subscribe button below the video. But there's the way in which the thing was constructed, just the peerless use of archive footage and of archive footage plus the stills taken on the day, inside the war room and with Cheney and with Bush, the team that was traveling with him in Florida. The way that was pieced together was very arresting, beautifully done. I also thought, I mean, it reminded me, and I wrote my column for the Times this week on that question, Pax Americana, and my conclusion is, with regret, as an Atlanticist, that actually we can't really rely on America anymore, which provokes all sorts of questions about how we are going to manage our own security. But it struck me, firstly, watching that film, how filial the feeling was on the day, the way in which it felt that because America and Britain and the West and Europe, such close allies, it felt as though we were under attack as well. So it wasn't just common human feeling because of, as you say, the horror. It was that, but it was also this sense that it was an attack on ourselves. I wonder whether as many people feel that now, partly because of the way that America has changed, but also our assumptions have changed since the Iraq War. Also, I wonder, it's this weird combination with America where it is simultaneously in retreat militarily and diplomatically and retreating into some form of isolationism, but it's also never been more dominant culturally because of the internet.
Yeah.
This is the weird duality. And I wonder if our attitudes to America are partly changed by the fact that we see it all the time now, because we live in its internet bubble, don't we? We live in its social media world that springs out of Silicon
Silicon
Valley.
Valley. Mm.
On the Afghan question, I was away for much of it, but glued to the coverage on Reaction and elsewhere. One of the remarkable things about it is, and I wonder if you agree with me, it just happened so quickly. I mean, even 3 weeks ago when we were last talking,
Mm.
Afghanistan didn't seem to be a first order issue and suddenly became the story that dominated and seems to have taken everyone by surprise. Journalistic community, diplomats, and governments.
Completely by surprise. I mean, it was over really in 3 days, wasn't it? From the Friday, by the Sunday night, they had command of Kabul airport. But it's really interesting reading now, for example, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee yesterday, where, actually the British people living in Afghanistan were warned to leave in April. Biden extended the deadline back in April till August. So it's sort of human nature. What it shows is the fallibility of human nature, that we need a deadline. I mean, everybody knew this was happening. We've actually known when Trump did the first deal, but maybe it's just you don't accept it until you see it. But clearly the intelligence on the ground was very, very badly off, because they did think that, the Taliban would take them at least a few weeks to reach the capital, but they were there. And I think it just sort of, in a sense, that shows you the nonsensical view that the Americans could build a nation and support a government. It wasn't like a military force coming in from another country. The Taliban are there. They are the local people. That's the sort of paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, I disagree slightly in that I think the mission was worth it. Those who sacrificed or who lost loved ones may disagree, and I can understand that. But the story of that 20 years is essentially that there were, as Bush said in the documentary, no further attacks on America. There were attacks in the UK, for reasons perhaps not directly related to Afghanistan, but Afghanistan was shut down as a terrorist haven. That's the first victory. Even if that was just a holding pattern, it seems to me worthwhile doing that for 20 years. Also, the fact that it's imperfect and not every Afghan woman got opportunity, or not every Afghan girl got an education, but far more, something like 50, 60 in urban areas, maybe 70% of girls did get an education that they wouldn't have done. That a girl born in 2001 had a chance and an opportunity that wouldn't have been there without the intervention. And you've got to hope, I suppose, that if the Taliban can't cope economically, and if the Taliban can't establish a stable government, then out of it something more positive emerges. But I just also think that I think Blair was right in that sense, is that you can't. It's not just a temporary. If you're going to defend your values, it's not just a temporary intervention that you go in and try and sort out the country and then leave. It's a kind of commitment you have to make, that the Americans made to Japan, or made to South Korea, or made to Germany. That if you are, people say the Americans are hopeless at nation building, and there's no evidence that nation building has ever worked. We'll try telling that to the Japanese, or to people who lived in what was formerly West Germany. So I think it's that the West has lost its confidence and is suffering a crisis of confidence. And I think the implications of the West withdrawing and America withdrawing into itself, I think it's moving back to something closer to the 1920s in terms of spirit. Of course, it's still involved in countries like Japan, but America is in a similar position to the position it was in after the Versailles Treaty, is that the political consensus at home and the political consensus in Congress is, look, let's try and avoid other people's conflicts and wars. Let's try and just sort of shut out the outside world as much as possible. And I think what happened in the 1920s shows that doesn't work, because it helped create the conditions for the disaster that followed. I'm not predicting a rerun of the 1920s or the 1930s, but if the West doesn't have a leader that's strongly engaged, and if people didn't like the world when America was deemed to be too interventionist, I don't think they're going to like the world where it's not remotely interventionist.
But actually, doesn't that raise a big question? Biden hasn't actually said that they're going to retreat. What he said is, we're not going to militarily go in and try and impose our values and nation build. And we don't really know what the rest might be, but I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that there'll be a full-scale retreat. I just don't think we're going to see troops on the ground in the same way. And I do slightly disagree with you about that you have to occupy. I mean, in Japan and Korea and West Germany, we didn't try and change those people's cultures and traditions, which is
Oh, we
what.
did. I mean,
Do you think we did?
we essentially, well, it wasn't just the US, it was a combination of the US and the Soviet invasion of Eastern Europe. But I mean, essentially, you know, Prussia, Prussian militarism was destroyed. The Japanese martial culture and warrior culture was destroyed and replaced with a commercial civil culture. So we went in with a mission which was aimed at sort of detuning these places and turning them into different kinds of societies because of what they'd become in the disaster of the early decades of the 20th century. So I think it is. There are examples of how it is possible to do these things positively, but it requires long-term commitment. I suppose I see that. I don't necessarily just blame Biden. To me, it's a long-tailed story that begins with Obama for understandable reasons after the Iraq disaster. He begins the process of withdrawal from Europe and essentially trying to say to Europe, you're standing on your own 2 feet. Trump accelerates that, and then Biden is really just is finishing the job. And I suppose what it means in terms of guarantees to allies, that's the thing that really worries me. If you look at how America's just behaved, and if you're the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainian president was in the White House this week, or you're in Taiwan and you look at the dispensation, you will now make, I think, a slightly different set of calculations about American guarantees, and authoritarian powers are going to pick up on that. But I think we're just going to wrap things up there. But should we continue this, Maggie, when we've got the next edition of our press review show coming out? So look out for that, and that'll be up shortly as well, where I'm sure it's going to be dominated by Afghanistan and these questions, and maybe one or two of your stories will be related to it, Maggie, that you select. So until the next time on Reaction, I'm Ian Martin, editor of Reaction, joined by Maggie Pagano. If you're not a subscriber, hit subscribe. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.